This model represents the locomotive works as they were in the mid-1950s, and shows the erecting shop, machine shop, blacksmith shop, wax canteen, carriage and wagon department, the paint shop, and also the main office block, which stood up on the slope on Harlaw Road. Unfortunately, nearly all gone. This area over here was the wax stores department, the toilet blocks, nothing fancy, no indoor toilets within the shops. You had to go out to the toilet block. The little ambulance room here was quite busy because in those days there was very little health and safety. A lot of accidents, toes being damaged with things falling on them, fingers getting nipped. I think there was one fatality during my time, but it was a dangerous place if you weren't careful. But you soon learned. By 1898, the Great North of Scotland Railway Company had outgrown their premises at Kitty Brewster in Aberdeen, and they searched in various towns, Ellen, Bantry, and eventually did a deal with the Earl of Kintore for the ground here in Inverurie. Construction started with stone quarried from the quarry at the top of Tirebagger Hill, and it continued for 4 years. But not only did they build the local works, they built 150 houses for the workforce in King Street, Queen Street, and Princess Street, and also along Harlaw Road, and that became known as the Colony. Water for the works was procured from the dam at Ballina, about 1.5 miles away, and the works used the water to create steam, which in turn worked the dynamos that provided electricity not only for the works, but also for the workmen's houses. The houses not only had electricity, but also indoor toilets, which must have been a great advantage by 1902, as we, living down the High Street in Inverurie, didn't get electricity until after the Second World War. Very little of the local works unfortunately remain, but at the time, in its heyday, it employed about 550 people. Mostly repairs. There were only 1 or 2 locomotives built completely from scratch, and the steam locomotives were completely overhauled at Inverurie. Not only that, but the carriage and wagon department was also busy, and they refurbished the carriages. They had upholsterers, French polishers, painters, and also they had a means of lifting with 2 cranes, lifting the carriages to remove the wheels, the bogie sets from underneath to go for refurbishment. This photograph shows the new overhead 100-ton capability crane. This is Mr. Garden, works manager, assistant works manager Jack Stronach, and this was Mr. Souter, chief accountant. This class of locomotive was the largest that we could handle. As you see, it just fits in nicely between the beams. And moving on to this photograph, this is what the interior of the machine and fitting shop looked like in the mid-1950s. Note all the overhead belting, very little safety, health and safety non-existent at that time. No markings on the floor as a walkway, but it was a busy place, and a lot of skilled engineering took place here. They said that applying for a job in the Merchant Navy or anywhere else, say that you came from the Loco works at Inverurie, you are more or less guaranteed a job. Unfortunately, because of the demise of steam and also the introduction of diesel rail cars, the works gradually declined. And by the 1960s, it was seen that they were no longer viable, and finally closed in 1969 with the loss of all the jobs. Fortunately, at that time, quite a few companies in Aberdeen still were in business, and a lot of people got jobs locally. Quite a few the skilled men went to Swindon to the motor car body press steel, and also to Corby to the pipe works. Very little of the original works now remain. Tesco took over the site of the erecting shop and machine shop. The one place that is unmarked really would be the main office block, still stands at the top of the slope. And the one place that no longer exists is another place that no longer exists rather, is the paint shop, which was used after the works closed for various things, but eventually was used by Tate's paper mill to store about 300 tons, I think, of rolls of paper, which unfortunately were set alight, and that burned down and was never replaced. The carriage and wagon department has seen a revival in its fortunes, having been taken over and used by the Garioch Heritage Society. But also down each side there are 20 townhouses, and in turn they were provided with a courtyard, cutting out the interior of the building and allowing windows access into the courtyard. The one building that was completely restored and renovated was the works canteen. Because it was a listed building and it occupied a site that the Aldi supermarket required, it was dismantled block by block and rebuilt as the sidings, now a small motel, bed and breakfast establishment. The other building, the blacksmith shop, the blacksmith's white metal shop, brass foundry, in turn is being turned into, I think it's 38 flats, which is ongoing at the moment. Apart from that, no track really remains. We have a little length outside the heritage building, but all the other track is gone, and there's really nothing left to indicate that it was once a thriving local works. This area became known as Glenmammy, as it was a scrapping area, and by the time I came back from the Air Force in 1959, this area was well established, and they were dismantling the older classes of locomotive. By this time, it was evident that the diesels were going to take over. The diesels, of course, we were unlucky that we fell heir to the MAN diesels, which were built by the North British Local Company in Glasgow. They were experts in steam locomotion. Their engines were exported all over the world, but unfortunately, they used a combination of MAN diesel engines, seemingly were ex-German submarine engines, and they seemed to be over rated for the work that they were doing, and we had a lot of problems with them, broken connecting rods, all kind of problems. And eventually, we then moved on to Sulzer and English Electric. The steam kept going in conjunction with the electrics, diesel electrics, for a few years, but gradually the whole thing changed, and by 1969 the works closed, unfortunately.